Hi, this is Marcia.
And this is Kelly.
We are the 2U's of 2U's Fiber Adventures. Thanks for stopping by.
You'll hear about knitting, spinning, dyeing, crocheting, and just about anything else we can think of as a way to play with string.
We blog and post show notes at 2usfiberadventures.com.
And we invite you to join our 2U's Fiber Adventures group on Ravelry. I'm 100 Projects.
And I am Better in Motion.
We're both on Instagram and Ravelry, and we look forward to meeting you there.
Enjoy the episode. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Marcia. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
I've got my knitting in my lap, and I'm ready.
Yeah, me too. I'm sitting here knitting on my wrap scarf.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at an easy part, not a lace part, so that's perfect. So,
and I'm knitting on my January blanket,
and it's January.
Yes. Oh, let me think. Would it be nice if I could finish this in January? I didn't even think about that.
You have just a couple of days left. You could do it.
Yes, because I don't know what is the. I don't think so. I have knit 48 inches. And I have used, I think, this is really not a project update episode, but I have a total of 16 balls, and I've just started my 12th. So I don't know that could get it done by the 3rd. Yeah. Okay, wait a minute. There's 31 days in January.
There's 31.
Right? Okay, yes. Okay, I don't know if I can get it done by then, but we'll see.
So you have, yeah.
If I don't do... Yeah. Well, actually, I can tell you right now I'm not going to get it done because tomorrow my weaving class starts. And that's Monday through Friday. And, we have to take the ferry to Vashon Island. So, there'll be knitting in the car, but we'll see. I'm not going to have time during the day to knit on it. So anyway, I'm giving that up. It was a thought, but it's not going to happen.
A fleeting thought that you let go immediately.
Yes, let's just release that to the universe. Okay. Anyway, but we should have a little celebratory toast because this is our 200th episode.
Hooray!
Now, I'm not drinking. Yeah, woohoo! I'm not drinking anything except water.
Yeah, I just finished my coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, tonight we can independently raise a glass. But anyway,
right. And all of our listeners who are out there listening can raise their glass as they listen, if they're listening at a time where that works, right?
They're not driving their car,
Yes, commuting to work.
Yeah, raise your commuter mug of your favorite beverages. Okay. That sounds like alcohol, doesn't it? I mean, tea or coffee. That's what I meant.
Yes.
Anyway. Okay. Well, we had put it out to our listeners for questions. So we're not really going to do our normal episode of project updates and all of that. Well, I guess we just kind of did. But we're going to just get right into the questions.
Yeah. There are lots of them, so we may not finish them all in today's episode. We will have a second episode if needed to finish the questions. And they're pretty much in the order that they came in. So we'll just kind of go down the list.
Okay. So I'll read the first one. It's from Pearl Girl Jen. And she says, I know that you two have mentioned traveling together. I'd love to hear some stories of your travels, maybe as young, fresh college grads, maybe as more experienced professionals. What's one of your most favorite adventures? I'm sure you have some good stories. Well, Kelly, do we?
Well, I think we have a lot of memorable traveling together. I'm not so sure that it's a great story, but
yeah. Well, I was going to say, I'll say after college, the one memorable trip I remember is after college. One summer, you came up and you drove up, I believe. And I think you had just Jenny at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And we drove around the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. People who are outside the country, Washington State, there was like a big peninsula called the Olympic Peninsula. It has the Cascade Mountains. We drove around that, and then that's Highway 1, and we drove Highway 1 all the way down Washington, Oregon, and then crossed over to I said Highway 101. Then we crossed over to Highway 1 in California and drove all the way back to your house. And that was a really fun trip. And I made a note here, Kelly, do you remember that you had just gotten a video camera?
Yes.
So I'm filming. I'm so excited. I'm filming. And then we get back to your house and we're watching the film, and it's like literally hours of trees.
Trees, yes. And clear cut, places where the trees were clear cut. And in the background, I don't know, I'm sure we had other music, but a Tracy Chapman CD in the background and rain. It was just really, I could have made a really depressing documentary.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway. But then I also remember on that trip too, because we were camping, but we couldn't stay at state parks because they book up months, years in advance. And so we just stayed at RV parks. Yeah. And so we'd pull into these RV parks in your Prelude, your Honda Prelude, with a tent, and set up this little tent next to trailers and campers and stuff.
Yeah, that was something that I discovered on my way up to visit you one time, that with the dogs, that that they have a lot of RV parks have tent sites set aside, and they almost always have openings in their tent sites if they have some of those tent sites. So yeah,
and it was nice because we would just call ahead and make a reservation, so we knew at the end of the day we had a place to camp. We didn't have to, Anyway, it was a fun trip.
Yeah, that was fun. We did another one in the middle of Washington, the Columbia River, and up to, I can't even remember all the places that we went on that trip, but kind of a similar camping trip. In that time, we had both dogs. Well, we had two dogs. We had my lab Jenny, and then we also had my friend's Boxer with us, and so that was a fun trip too. But that one we had my big white van.
Yeah, we had the van, and then we made a point of going on back roads. I had a book. It was called Back Roads of Washington or something. And it had stories about all the different towns, why they were named, what they were named, and a little history. And so we just had that, and we avoided the major highways if at all possible, and just drove all these little back roads. And that was actually a pretty fun trip too. I would come down and visit you, and we would go. I would go, or if you'd come up to Washington State with the dogs for hunt tests, I would go to all the hunt tests with you. And I always, you dragged me along. I remember thinking it was really interesting and fun. A lot of times really uncomfortable because super hot a lot of times,
No bathroom.
Yeah. And also the time that you took my brother and I to the pheasant hunting, because you were members of a, what do you call it? Like a club?
A club, yeah. There was a club. There used to be a club
in
Gilroy.
Yeah. And that was super fun. I'm not interested in hunting, but I was so interested to see the dogs working because I'd always seen them working at the hunt tests. And it's you're trying to simulate a hunting situation, but it's not really a hunting situation as much as you try to simulate it. And so when they're actually out there really in the actual situation, actual hunting, they were really amazing to watch.
Yeah, that was really fun. I was really sad when that closed.
Yeah. I made a note here too that I think this is now with Ben, we would always come down to visit you, and we always would go to Monterey and rent the Surreys and all the dog stuff with Ben because he was completely in love with your dogs. And we would always go take them to the beach at Carmel, and then always go to the Forge and the Ford because this made him Ben so happy is that they had menus for the dogs. And he could order kibble. They could have kibble, a hot dog, or a New York steak. And you're like, they can have a bowl of kibble. So that's what he was very excited about, the waitress bringing a bowl of kibble for the dogs.
Yeah, we did that every time you came to visit. Mm-hmm. We took the dogs to the restaurant. Yeah, that was fun. So here's another trip that I remember, not an overnight trip, but so Robert and I got married in 1984. It was the same day as my graduation, May. And Marcia, of course, Marcia was there, and you've heard of her friend Dave, who helped her put the sink together. He took the pictures at the wedding. And so the day after the wedding, everybody in my family all left. And then the next day, Robert actually had to go back because he had to take a test. He was still in school, and so he had to go back on Monday to take the test. And Marcia and Dave and I drove all around southeastern Washington, went to all different cemeteries and stopped in little places and got ice cream. And so I always laughed that I went on my honeymoon with Marcia and Dave because Robert had to go back up to Spokane to take his biology test. But that was a fun trip. I have pictures of us in wheat fields and in cemeteries. And
yeah, I think I have the same pictures because Dave took all the pictures at the wedding, but he always took a lot of pictures. Mm-hmm. Well, no, actually, let me rephrase that. He didn't take a lot of pictures. He would just take really good pictures. And so, or maybe he would take a lot of pictures, but this is the day before digital cameras. You only got to see the good ones. So,
right.
I don't know, but we haven't done any international travel. We've not done any of that together. It's mostly been Washington, California, Oregon. Mm-hmm. And just, a lot of times we'd get together in the summer and do something. You'd come up to Washington. I go to California. A couple times I think you came up and met us on the Oregon coast when my family was down there.
Oh, yeah, in Manzanita. Yeah, that was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also wrote down here, too, the time when we were down visiting and you and my brother came along, and of course, Mark always wanted to be busy doing things, and he wanted to go down to San Simeon, which is the Hearst Castle, which is William Randolph Hearst's house on the coast in California. And poor Ben was probably 8 at the time? I don't know. And he announced that it was the worst day of my life. And then I going and look, and it probably was the best day of my brother's life. He was fascinated by this house. He always been fascinated by this house. When he was Ben's age, I think we saw San Simeon, and he was obsessed with it and has been ever since. And so, yes, completely different personalities.
Well, and I think, poor Ben, not only did he have to go through San Simeon, but it's like a 2.5 hour drive from here. So he had to sit in the car for 5 hours. Yes. And then take 2.5 hours down, take a tour of this house, and then 2.5 more hours on the way back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine why he thought that.
That poor kid.
Wasn't the best day of our life either, right, Marcia?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of fun, but it's also, it was a lot. It was just a lot. It was hot, too. It was, anyway, it's just funny. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. Well, any more we want to say about travel?
I think that's enough.
That's enough. Yeah. Okay. So Super Kip asked, you got me interested in spinning in local different sheep breeds and into more sustainable yarns. So you achieved a tiny bit of your mission.
Yay.
How did you decide it was necessary to do your parts for World Fleece? And then the second question was, do you plan for more to use spin-offs such as your store? I'll just read all these questions that she sent. Your podcast is the one I enjoy most. Thank you. That's very sweet. So I hope you do not have an exit plan yet, or do you? Okay. Kelly, do you want to start?
Sure. So I started watching a lot of podcasts, and it was a lot of, here's what yarn arrived in my mailbox this week, right? And it was, I have to, and this is not a judgment. I'm not making a judgment. I was fascinated and a little bit shocked by all the yarn that people were acquiring. I would watch a weekly podcast or even a bi-weekly podcast, and at every episode, new things were arriving. And I mean, I didn't knit that fast. And so that was kind of interesting, but also shocking to me. And then the other thing that I noticed was it was all superwash merino. And so it was all about this indie dyed superwash merino, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But I was kind of surprised that I wasn't hearing about any other kind of yarn. It was all superwash merino. And, I had a lot of spinning experience. And so I knew a lot of other breeds of sheep. I had spun a lot of different breeds of sheep. I'd even spun some of the more rare breeds. And so I just kind of thought, that was interesting. And there was a whole big piece of the yarn world that was missing. And I think at that time too, it was mostly knitting. There really wasn't any weaving that I can recall in podcasts. And there wasn't really any talk of spinning on podcasts. Maybe there were a couple. There were a couple of podcasts that had names about spinning, and it was mostly spinning. But the majority of what I was listening to and watching was about yarn, and the majority of the yarn was superwash merino. And so I started thinking that we had something to kind of say about other kinds of yarn. So what about you? I know I'm the one who kind of this is the theme this is a theme, Marcia. I drag you into things.
Well, I've been honest. Yes, it's true. You do drag me into
we
things.
drag each other because your trip drug me to Forge in the Forest and San Simeon.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, what I wrote down here is that fiber arts has brought so much to my life. And I wrote down relaxation, creativity, friendship, and community. And that just I wanted to spread that joy. Now, you did drag me into it. It's true. But it has given me so much, right? I mean, if I think about what my life would be like if I did not have fiber in my life, I don't really know what I would be doing. I mean, I would find something, I'm sure. But if I think about it now that the friends I do things with, a lot of it is, and there's such a deep connection with our listeners and the people that we meet at our meetups we have, or which has been a while because of the pandemic, but the retreats that we go to, and the travel that I've done, it has a fiber focus. So Scotland and Iceland were the two trips but every time I do go someplace, I kind of look for a mill or something fibery, so it has brought so much. And I think it's nice to be able to share that. So, yeah, no, I think that's true. And I pretty much talk every morning, in quotation marks, every morning to the people in the Ravelry group, there's, and I know there's more people who read those posts than actually post. But it's, and Robert will say, well, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm talking to my friends. Sometimes I'm working, and that's why he asked me, what are you doing? Because sometimes I start my schoolwork in the morning. But most of the time, I spend a little bit of time every morning talking with people in the Ravelry group about yarn, knitting, life, dogs, all kinds of stuff, So it has really brought a lot of community. Yeah. So I think that while it kind of started with the idea is sort of championing heritage breeds or endangered breeds or sustainability and carbon neutral, it's also, I think, a huge benefit of bringing the about World Fleece is just the joy and connection.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't really realize, I guess there wasn't a question about what surprised you most, but I think that would be something that I would be the most the most surprised by, something that was unexpected. I mean, I know that when I was listening to podcasts, I felt that I was kind of in community. It made me feel less lonely. But I don't think I thought about it in quite those words or in quite that way as I do now, well, 7, 8, how long have we been doing? Well, 200 episodes, let's just say, since 2014. So 8 going on 9 years,
Yeah. Yeah, and also I've mentioned this before, but I don't think when you suggested doing a podcast, I didn't even know what a podcast was. I don't think I really knew what it was. I didn't listen to them. So the idea of feeling so connected was not something I had any experience with. So our exit plan. Do we have an exit plan?
No.
I don't believe, unless you know something I don't know, I would say we don't have an exit plan.
No, the extent of my exit plan is every once in a while I think to myself, I should write down all the passwords that I have for the things that have to do with the podcast. So if I die, someone knows what to do.
Kelly, we think alike, because that's what I was thinking. What happens if,
Yeah. So
if one of us dies, what does the other do?
So yeah, there's no exit plan. This is fun. I enjoy it.
Oh yeah.
It's one of them, there are two of the most fun days of the month are the days that we record, I think. So, and then there's also a question about spin-offs. And you had said no spin-offs, but I just wanted to.
What are you gonna drag me into now, Kelly?
Yeah. Well, I do want to get the store kind of back to life.
Yes.
I do have a desire to do that, get that store back to life after sort of decline during the pandemic. But also, and this will be future, but we were talking about doing meetups. We had kind of started planning or pre-planning a meetup in Colorado. Before the pandemic. And so maybe, once people are traveling more and I feel more comfortable traveling, and now that Robert's retired too, that's a little easy. It's a little easier for something in the summer, for example, to travel somewhere and if I didn't have to travel by plane, travel somewhere and work with a yarn shop and have a meetup and anyway, personal appearances. Isn't that a thing podcasters do now, right?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, no, we had talked about that, and we were looking at a listener had suggested Colorado, and so we were looking at we were sort of in the works, and then so no, that
we had the one at Seabrook, but that was that was pretty small and kind of out of the way. But along that was kind of our initial foray into this idea of having meetups in different places. So that was I welcome being dragged into this, Kelly, to that spinoff. We've had a lot more fun in our lives because of the things we've dragged each other into, for sure.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. Well, I'll read the next one. Sal Pal 1, Sarah. She says, it kind of leads from the last one. I wonder how you two decided to start the podcast. And then she says, I hope the exit plan is not even thought of. So she'll be happy. So I'll go ahead and talk about this. I mentioned a little bit before about how I was feeling really lonely. It was about 2012, and I just was feeling this. I was knitting. I was on Ravelry. But I mostly at that time used Ravelry to look for patterns or to find errata to patterns. I didn't do anything in any of the forums. I wasn't part of any of the forums. I don't even think I kept my yarn or my projects on Ravelry at that time. I do remember thinking back when I joined Ravelry that I'd rather be making the projects than putting all the information about them in the in the website, which now seems kind of funny because it's not that complicated.
No,
to put your project in Ravelry. But anyway, not exactly sure why it came on me. I did have a change of job in that point, and so maybe because I didn't have the creativity of teaching, I don't know. But I just was feeling really creatively lonely. None of my friends, local friends, are knitters, or at that time were knitters, and so I just didn't have a community. I didn't have any people that I knitted with. And I can't even remember how I found out about knitting podcasts, but I didn't listen to them. I didn't listen to them on my iPod, because at that time I had an iPod, and I didn't listen to them on the iPod. I listened to them on the computer. So I think maybe I found them through blogs, knitting blogs, because I read a lot of knitting blogs. Anyway, my first one that I started listening to was Stash and Burn. That was my favorite, Jenny and Nicole. And I would sit with the computer open with the player, and then they would talk about a pattern, and I go look it up. So I have my knitting with me while I was listening, and then I click over on the computer to search the patterns that they talked about. And there was just something really comforting about being able to knit while I was listening to other people who were knitters. And then it got me kind of curious. The more podcasts I listened to, and then some of them I watched, the more it got me kind of curious, because they all seemed to know each other. And so there was not just the community that I felt as a listener, but there seemed to be a community of podcasters. And then, like, in 2013 and 14, that job that I changed into, my grant administration job, I was just super unhappy there. And so then I became really obsessive. And that was my coping mechanism, was just to sit in the room and knit and listen to podcasts.
Yes, this might be too much information, Kelly, but I got a call from Robert. I'm really worried about Kelly. All she's doing is sitting in the guest room listening to podcasts.
Yes, and knitting.
I'm really worried about her.
Yeah, my production that year was through the roof. I made a lot of things. Yeah, it was a dark time, let's just say, and that was my bright spot, And so then I started listening to podcasts about podcasting, and really decided that I wanted to do it. I wanted to be not just part of the community of listeners, and I felt like I had something to add. And I think maybe also because of missing teaching, that could have been a big part of it. I felt like I had something to add to the conversation. And so I talked to you about it, and I kind of had a plan in my mind of that I wanted to do, but I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to sustain it. Like, I didn't want to start it unless I could keep doing it. It was a point in my life where I couldn't add to my blues the fact that I had started something and not finished it, right? I was like, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it in a way that makes me feel good, not in a way that just gives me one more thing that I started and then didn't finish. And so it took me a long time to get to the point where I felt like I could commit. So I gave myself a deadline that I had to have our episodes published. I heard about the podcaster meetup that Two Knitlet Chicks and Yarniacs were going to have, at Stitches. And I made a goal for myself that Marcia and I needed to have a podcast so that we could go to the podcaster, so that I could go, Marcia wasn't coming down that year, so that I could go to Stitches and go to the podcaster meetup as a podcaster. So that was my goal. You had to have, and you wanted to have at least 5 episodes. Yeah, you had.
Wasn't it something like that?
In those days, you had to have a certain number of episodes before Apple would even put you in iTunes. And so, whatever that number was, plus a few, I wanted to make sure that we had that, because I was just like, I want to go to that as a podcaster. And so I was like, okay, Marcia, we got to do it now.
So you dragged me into this. And I'm just going to say one thing you had said too is that you were really worried about being able to do this on a regular basis. And that was my concern too, is what do I have to say that I can come up with content every 2 weeks? And of course, as we joke, maybe we don't have content, but we have something to say.
We still find things to say.
So anyway, but when you talk to me about this, I'm like, I don't know. I have so much going on in my life. I don't know that I have time for this. And again, I don't want to fail either at this. And and how are we going to sustain this? It just seemed like too much to come up with content every 2 weeks. And we have finding out that is not really, it's something that we really look forward to. I really look forward to recording. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we've done a pretty good job of staying on schedule. I mean, between all the things that have been going on for both of us over the past 8 years, I think we've done a pretty good job of staying right on schedule. Or if we get off schedule, there were a few times where we would have bonus episodes to like catch us up or, So
let's see. She also asked, what is your fiber journey and how did you move from one craft to the next? So, mine's pretty quick. My great Aunt Ruth Utterback, my grandmother's sister, taught me to crochet, and I would just grow, like most kids, just long stretches of like long strips of crochet, that's all I did. And then my mother showed me how to knit, the basics of knitting, when I was like 8. But my real knitting journey, I said, started after college. And Kelly, after graduation, I just needed something tactile and creative. And anyway, you can talk about, I know some of your journey, but I just needed something hands-on and tactile, something that wasn't intellectual. It was not an intellectual where I didn't have to read a ton and write a lot, just something. And I took this knitting class, and I've joked about how I thought, I didn't tell anybody I was taking a knitting class at my local yarn shop because it seemed like something that old ladies did. And I was a young woman. I didn't want to know, which is so ironic now because so many young men and women are knitting, So that's how I made a sweater, and I really I did a lot of knitting. I only had one project at a time going on. And the knitting kind of stopped when Ben was born because I thought, I'm going to have all this time to knit. And that is absolutely untrue. When you have a baby, there's no time to knit. So, or I didn't find that I had the time to knit. I kind of got back into knitting when he got a little bit older and I had more free time. And then you got your spinning wheel, and you can talk about that, but I really was fascinated by the spinning. So you got me into spinning. And now you're going to get me into weaving because my weaving class starts on January 30th.
Yeah, so tomorrow, right? That's exciting.
Yeah, because So that's going to be my next thing. I'm very excited about that. So, but anyway, you can talk about your journey.
Okay. Well, like you, I crocheted and knitted flat things when I was a kid. I'm sure my grandmother taught me how to crochet. She was a great crocheter. I think I've mentioned before, she made those with crochet thread. She made those like coverlets with little baubles, all the little pieces and all the little crocheted like hexagons that had little baubles in them and really intricate. She was always crocheting, and she always had next to her chair, I think this is why I like them so much, the ball of crochet cotton, the crochet cotton on the cardboard. It's wound kind of like into a cake, but it's on a cardboard. She always had one of those sitting on the table beside her chair and a crochet hook stuck in it. And so she crocheted a lot. My mom knitted. I think my grandmother knew how to knit, but anyway, my mom knitted. So I got taught at some point as a child, and I did, pretty much flat things. But my Aunt Betty took me to a dog show when I was, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, something like that. And there was a woman at the dog, of course, going to a dog show was my dream because I was obsessed with dogs and dog training. But then at the dog show, there was a woman who was spinning her Samoyed's fur, the undercoat. And that was super fascinating. I just was, that was like, okay, that was in my head that I was going to do that as an adult. And, I can remember in college, like thinking about what my house was going to look like and the room I was going to have with the things I liked. And there was always a spinning wheel there. And then when I got done with my doctorate, kind of the same thing as you with women. When I got done with my doctorate, well, the coursework, not the dissertation. That's another story.
Yes, that's another story. Yes.
I decided it was time to get my spinning wheel. And so Marcia and I went to the Golden Fleece in Santa Cruz, and I ended up with a spinning wheel. First, I ended up going to the spinning day that the Anne's Web Guild holds. The woman who owned the shop, she sent me there first before she would sell me a wheel. And then I came back and I bought the wheel. And so that's where I started spinning. That was my first adult journey into fiber arts. I did in college. One time I went to one of the yarn shops and I bought this yarn and I bought a pattern for a crocheted sweater, like a little short-sleeved sweater, cotton crocheted sweater. And I worked at for an older woman, kind of being at her house, helping her, make sure she had her meals and things. And so I had a lot of time to just sit. So I thought, I'll crochet a sweater. I mean, I had not crocheted anything except flat stuff, kid stuff for, at all. But I thought I could make this crocheted sweater. So I'm following the pattern, and one part of the sweater is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you know how on crochet, if you don't know where to stop, your one edge, it kind of gets trapezoidal. So anyway, it was a mess, and I never could figure out how to fix the mess. But that was that between childhood and my adult spinning, that was the only thing I really did with crafting. I did do like latch hook rugs. I did a few of those. I did all sorts of craft stuff, but nothing was nothing stuck. And then spinning just started me off on the whole thing. Spinning, then weaving, then knitting reluctantly. Because I couldn't figure out when Marcia was knitting. She would come to visit before I had my spinning wheel. She'd come to visit and she'd bring her knitting. She was always knitting sweaters. You knit a lot of sweaters for a lot of other people.
I knit a lot of sweaters, and I knit a lot of sweaters for myself too, which we've talked about this before in the podcast, but I've got them out a couple of years ago. I got them because I stopped wearing them, and they're
they have a lot of positive ease.
A lot of positive, because this is in the 80s, and that style is to have these. And in fact, I look back at like movies at that time, and people have sweaters on. We wore really baggy clothes in the 80s. The pleated pants and all the shoulder pads and what. And so a lot of these sweaters, they're just, and as I say, I am not smaller than I was in 1980.
Even in the 90s, that look was around. Yeah,
but because maybe like the 90s too, because I remember going to work. I had a raincoat that had these huge shoulder pads in it. Like it looked a little those jackets they put over the football players to keep them warm when they're standing on the sidelines. But one thing I didn't really think about, but other than fiber, I did a lot of crafts too. Like I did hooked rugs. I did cross stitch. I had a couple of kits. I did, embroidery. I'd get these kits, and then, my mother would make a pillow out of it. And I did a lot of sewing. I made a lot of my clothes.
Yeah, I did. I sewed a lot as a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know if they teach sewing anymore now, but I learned, my mother taught me to sew, but then I also had sewing in middle school. And we had home ec, and I had made a jumper, a wide wale corduroy jumper, I remember. Brown. And I went to the community college for a while, and I took a tailoring class there, and I made a suit.
Cool.
So I did a lot of that kind of thing. I also remember my parents got it for me. It was a kit, and I gave it to my grandmother, but it was in the 60s, and it was a handbag, but then you glued on all these, you bedazzled it. You glued on all these sequins and rhinestones and stuff. And I had gone to visit my great aunt, Ruth Utterback, in Tacoma. I would go in the summer, spend 2 weeks with her, and I worked. She set up a card table, and I just worked on that purse for my grandmother. And I don't know if my grandmother ever carried it, but that was a thing in like the 60s, I think, and early 70s. I don't know when, is to have sort of a bedazzled, kind of like a basket kind of handbag, kind of. Oh, God. Do we answer that question? Do we think?
Okay, so I think that's good. And then she wanted to ask you about your career.
So I started after college. I worked as a bookseller at the University Bookstore, which serves the University of Washington. And then I had various jobs there. I was the assistant to the general manager of the store. And then my last position was head of marketing. So I handled all of the advertising and merchandising, and I oversaw author events and all that stuff. So anyway, that was what I was doing, until I left.
And then travel.
And then she also she said, assuming travel opens up and becomes safe again, where are you thinking of going? Kelly, I don't know what you're thinking. I wrote down Peru, New Zealand, Croatia, and Norway.
Oh, wow. That sounds fun.
I've been thinking about. I've also, I didn't put this down, but I really would like to go to Washington, D.C. Because I've never been, and I want to go to what I would sort of like to do is just get an Airbnb for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so you don't feel like you have to see everything in 5 days, that I can start seeing.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. When I went for the fellowship in, I think it was 2015, I was there for 20 days. And we had, we had work days Monday through Friday. Fridays were usually short, I think. But we had work days, and we got to see some things during those work days. But we also had free time to be able to just see what was there, and it was nice to have that time. Yeah, I don't really have what I would like to have. I would like to go to Washington D.C. and bring Robert so he could see it, because I think he would really enjoy it. And we were actually going to go. Now I can't remember when it was, but then something came up, and we decided that it wasn't going to work that summer. But I'm not very much of a traveler. I mean, people who listen to the podcast maybe know this about me. I'm not very much of a traveler. We camp fairly locally, even though I have summers off. Most of our summer trips are close or West Coast, visiting you, or, going to places in California or Oregon. So I'm just not that much of a traveler anymore. Or I traveled after high school, and thought that I would continue doing that, but it just really hasn't happened. And then I used to like to go on conference trips for work, but even those I had gotten, way before the pandemic, I had gotten to the point where, work travel just wasn't as appealing as it once was. I like my house, my dogs, so yeah, I don't know. There might be some travel in my future, but it's not something that I do a lot of.
on the lines of camping, I put down here also, Kelly, is I would like to go with you and Robert camping. We did the trailer rally, which was fun, but it was not really camping. Right. There was a lot of people coming to take a tour of the trailer, and we were touring trailers. And so I really like, I don't want to go, I'm not going to pose all the time, but just like one time where we could go and then we could just sit and knit and spin and eat and drink.
Sit in the forest and
just, yeah. And, I would like to do that. So
that'd be fun. Yeah, that's the kind of travel I enjoy, I think.
She also asked, which project do you look back on with the most sense of pride and accomplishment, and of course, why? So I'll go first, Kelly. I put down the garter squish blanket, the first one I made. And it's not because it was any kind of technical challenge. It's just, as we've talked about, it's just garter stitch. But that's the one to remind people where I had made a sweater for my dad out of Cascade 220 held double. I still laugh when I say that.
With about 20 inches of positive ease.
Yes, I get, yes. I gave it to him for Christmas, and it was way too big, way too heavy, and way too hot. And my father was cold all the time, but he could not wear that sweater because it was too hot. Because it was just, too much,
of wool.
You know. A lot of wool, but he would always wear it on, Christmas morning. He'd wear that sweater, but it was just too much. So anyway, after he passed away, and I was helping my mom kind of clean things up, and I found the sweater, and it had some moth damage, and so I didn't really feel like I didn't know what to do with it, and I kind of felt bad giving it to the Goodwill, kind of. So I saw that blanket, the Stephen West Garter Squish blanket, and I thought, I'll just unravel that sweater, because when I unraveled it, I ended up having about 4,000 yards of worsted weight yarn. Yes.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. I still laugh. I can't stop laughing. It's so ridiculous. Just think what I spent. I mean, I think Cascade 20 is like $10 a skein.
Yeah, it's not the most expensive yarn, but that's a lot.
And there's 220 yards in it. Anyway, that's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down. Anyway, basically then I unraveled the entire sweater. I reskeined it, washed everything, and then went on a quest. I had been buying worsted weight yarn. If I get some from the D-stash room. When we go to the retreat, at thrift stores, I'd see Cascade 220 or some worsted weight yarn. And so then all of that extra yarn that I had, I just figured out my 4,000 yards of that. And some I used as they were, some I over dyed. And
that was an adventure on its own, because then you went to Jorstad and did some over dyeing of some of the skeins.
Yeah. And then I dyed some myself. And then the other thing about that blanket is I started it when my mother, we had moved her out of the house and she was at assisted living. And so I would go down. I saw her pretty much every day. And we'd sit either in her room or in the common room, or in nice weather, we'd sit outside on the patio. It was because I was knitting on it mostly in the summer because it was hot, and I kind of drape it over the arm of the chair and put it on the chair next to me so it wasn't actually sitting on my lap. And then I have very, very fond memories of the yarn is from the sweater I made for my father, and very fond memories of working on it while I sat with my mother in those final days. So,
yeah, that's a project that has so many layers. All of the stuff that you learned along the way, and the designing of the project, and then the origin of the yarn. And that's a good one. That's a really good one.
What about you?
So I think the knitting project that I'm most proud of is the 1958 sweater that I made from a pattern book that was from 1958. is a all over lace, and I made it in the silk that I accidentally, well, not accidentally. What was accidental about it was how much it cost.
Yes. Yes.
I didn't even know. I bought the yarn not knowing what I would make with it, thinking I would make a sweater, but not really knowing how to knit very well, and not knowing how much yarn it took to knit a sweater. So I bought 2 skeins, and there were no prices on it, and I had no idea how much it was going to cost. And when I got up to the register, I had waited so long in line that I was like, okay, well, I'm already committed to this yarn. My mom and I looked all over for it because we had found it. We saw it at Stitches, and then we left it. And then I wanted to go back and get it, and we had to search all over to find the booth, the Tessa's Yarn booth, where it was. So, there was that commitment, and then I stood in line for it, which was a commitment. And I also really liked it. Anyway, so I forget how much it was, but it was early in my spinning, probably early 2000s, somewhere in the early 2000s. Anyway, I had the yarn for the longest time and didn't do anything with it. And then I started this sweater. I found this sweater pattern. I decided to make this sweater pattern, which in 1958, a sweater pattern said things like, decrease 10 stitches over the next 20 rows staying in pattern. Like, this pattern was literally not even a full page in the knitting magazine for an entire sweater. So, but I was able, and it was in pieces, and I decided to do it in the round. So I figured that out. And what else did I have to do? There was something else I did that when I look back, is crazy that I even thought to do that. But I started it back then and knit on it up to the armholes, I think. Just knit straight up from the bottom up to the armholes. And then I started to do the decreases and thought, this is going to be way too big. If I do these decreases, it's going to take way too long, and my armholes are going to be like twice the length of the sweater. And so I put it away because I didn't know what to do. And then picked it back up in, I don't know, I want to say like 2012, maybe. I know it's in my project page somewhere. Picked it back up, figured it out, got it going, finished the sweater. I think I finished the sweater sometime during my obsessive knitting period, I think. Yeah. So, and lots of things could have gone wrong with that sweater. Hand-dyed yarn. I did not alternate skeins. Variegated yarn, lace pattern, pattern for a wool sweater, and I was using silk. Like, tons of things could have gone wrong to make this a disaster, but I love that sweater. It's one of my favorites, and I'm just really proud that I was able to figure out how to make it. Yeah, with all those.
Yeah.
So, and then I also put down a couple of other ones. I think the weaving project, just regular weaving, not hand spun project, but one of my weaving projects was the blanket I made for my sister. I was buying yarn from newsletters you get in your email back in the day, again, before Ravelry, or not before Ravelry, but before the podcast. And so I was buying yarn, and I had this whole wall of yarn in the studio. And one day I decided I was going to weave a blanket for my sister at school. It was one of my projects at my school weaving class. And so I just looked at what I had and collected up colors that I liked. And then, and I was able to put together enough oranges and yellows, and along with a few other, and then I had some green in there and with leftovers. And I made this really beautiful warp. And then I had a banana colored yellow that I had bought on sale, a big giant cone of this color that was terrible. I mean, I would never have used it. I don't know what I was thinking, except that it was inexpensive.
And big, yeah.
And big,
yeah.
huge.
I know. We big, yeah.
So I used this banana colored yarn for the weft, and it was perfect. She likes yellow, and it was perfect. So I made her that blanket. So that was something I was proud of, for like figuring out how to use all this like hodgepodge of yarn. And then probably the most sort of professional project that I did was a handspun. It was a wall hanging that I made for Chuck, a friend, a neighbor. You met him when we lived at the other house.
Yeah.
And I wove a project where it was representative of like looking out on the fields of green and the different colors of green and the different colors of red of salad greens, the lettuce fields. And so that wall hanging came out really well. He wanted a wall hanging, and so I designed it and spun the yarn and dyed the yarn, carded the yarn, all of that, carded the wool, spun it, all that.
Oh, wow.
So all the way from the fleece to finished project. I think I had maybe started the yarn spinning before, it was like rug wool. And I'd started the spinning before he said, oh, he'd like a wall hanging. And so it was, it's a good way to use some of my rug yarn. And so then I put the colors together and made that project. So there's one knitting project, one weaving project, and a handspun project.
Nice.
The next one is about our Ravelry names, and I think mine is pretty obvious because I have so many things going on. Between school and home and projects and gardening and all that. So I've always got something going on. Thus the worry that I wouldn't be able to sustain it, because I start a lot of things that I don't finish. So,
and mine is because I said everything's better if you just keep moving. Like you need to move your body, but then just in life you have to keep moving on.
Well, and you changed yours in the midst of kind of a difficult time in your life, right? Because your original Ravelry name was your married name.
Yeah, my married name. And then with the divorce, I didn't want that anymore. And also it felt like, it felt like I didn't even want my name now part of my Ravelry or Instagram name. It's like I wanted my email, I wanted everything to match. And I didn't really want my name part of it. Because, I don't know why. I'm not really sure why I felt that way, but I didn't want it. So I came up with this one, and I liked it. So it felt right. So
when I was listening to the previous episodes, I was noticing that if somebody starts at the beginning and they're looking for you, they won't find you. Because you did change your Ravelry name. So, all right. And then the last question from Sarah is, how many aunts has Kelly got? And this one made me laugh because I only have 2. But I think I talk about my aunt this and my aunt that, my aunt did this, my other aunt did that, my other aunt. I talk about them as my aunt and my other aunt. And so so I have all these other aunts, but I really just have Aunt Betty, who lives with us, and Aunt Pat, who is her older sister. My Aunt Betty's older sister. She's the middle sister of the family. And my mom is the oldest sister. So, and Aunt Pat's the one who had the piano that we now have. So just 2. And then I have a great aunt. Maybe that's part of it too. The great aunt, Aunt Stella, was the one whose money, what she gave my Aunt Pat when she died was the money that my Aunt Pat used to pay for the piano. So her picture is on the piano. But yeah, I only have 2 aunts. My mom only has 2 sisters, and my dad has only brothers. So I thought that was funny.
Okay, it's Fran said, wandering yous want to know your friendship origin story. And I said, we just met on the first day of college. Well, it was actually because I was a transfer student. It was technically my first day. You had been there 2 years.
Well,
and then
I had been there 1 year. It was my second year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, your second year. Okay. And
yeah, because because you're a transfer student, and me because they made a mistake, ended up in the overflow dorm, which it was the best mistake, probably one of the better mistakes that happened to me, that I got put in that dorm. Lots of reasons, but our friendship is one of the best things. Yeah, it was an old, we've talked about this before, but it was an old hospital that the college had purchased, and they used it as an overflow dorm. My roommates from freshman year, one of them was in a sorority, so she lived in the sorority house her sophomore year, and the other one didn't come back to Whitman. She went somewhere else. And so I was just going to be put with somebody in a dorm room in one of the dorms, and I think my choice was Lyman. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But they lost my information, and so I ended up with a single room in North Hall, which had been the old maternity surgery room. Yeah.
Yeah. And I ended up with a single room too. But they had kind of a common room with a kitchen in there, and we would hang out in there. And
so I was working for Mrs. Fitzgerald's during the day, after classes and stuff. And so I had been, I would come home about the time people were gathering to go to dinner. And so we would see each other then. And then I would see you in that room all the time having tea. So that's how we met. And then,
but we really were not close, from the start.
We just kind of were acquaintances.
Yeah, kind of acquaintances. And then,
in fact, I don't really remember meeting you the first day. I mean, I remember I met a lot of people that first day, but I don't have a clear picture of meeting you at the entrance of the dormitory that day. Just that I met a lot of people who were gathering to go to dinner. Yeah, but I do remember going in there to make myself some coffee, or going in there to heat up some soup or something, and you would be in there having tea. Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't remember. I would.
That's a long time ago. Well, and then the next year, or the next semester, because we were only in the overflow dorm for one semester, and then they moved us onto campus. And
is that right?
Yeah.
So you're right.
So I roomed with somebody I barely knew, and you roomed with someone you barely knew, both, all from North Hall. And we were across the hall from each other. And my roommate and I mean, she was fine, but we weren't close. And I don't think you and your roommate were really close. But Marcia and I would have coffee in the afternoon together a lot. We were a lot of times by ourselves in our rooms in the afternoon. And so I do remember that.
And either in our rooms, or we would go down, a lot of times we go down to, it doesn't exist anymore, but Merchant's Cafe.
Oh, yeah.
We'd go down there and have coffee. We've talked about that, because you were like, they had European style coffee.
Yes, yes. Something I did not know about.
Not just the stuff made with a Mr. Coffee,
Yeah. And then.
Yeah, and then, go ahead.
The next year, so the thing about Walla Walla is you can't get there from here, right? No matter where you are, you can't get to Walla Walla from there.
That's true.
And so, it was like finding a flight, and then a connecting flight, and then it was always complicated. And there were weather issues, and there were flight connection issues. And so the next year, when I needed to get back to Whitman, I just flew to Seattle and stayed with your family, and then we all drove across the state. And so, that was really helpful for me to just have to worry about the flight to Seattle and not have to worry about how to fly from Seattle to Walla Walla and get that connection and all that. And then how to get how to get from the airport in Walla Walla to this little tiny airport in Walla Walla to Whitman. None of that complication was there. And so that was really nice. And that's kind of when we started to be, that one semester, and then the next year we were friends. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the infamous, because my mom and dad drove us back and we ate our way across the state.
Licorice ice cream.
Remember, it took us like 10 hours to get to Walla Walla because we stopped everywhere. It was a fun trip.
That was a very fun trip.
I know.
Yeah.
So it's Fran's next question is, Kelly, how did you and Robert meet?
Okay. Well, let's have this be our last question because of the time. And I'll try to make this short. But
actually, she has one. Actually, before you start that, she has one last question.
Oh.
So let's finish up. It's Fran.
Oh, okay.
Before you talk about how you met, her last question is, will you bring the podcast to Rhinebeck or Maryland Sheep and Wool? And Kelly, I said, I would love to, but Kelly's teaching schedule will get in the way.
Yes.
I don't know if it's ever going to happen.
Maryland, maybe.
When is Maryland?
It's in May, I think.
Oh, that
we now
might
have
be a
16-week
possibility.
calendar. It might not be early. It might be early in May. I don't remember, but yeah, that my teaching schedule, it makes it difficult to travel across the country because you have a whole day getting there and a whole day getting back, and then, I know people do it. I could go to New York for the weekend, but it would be hard. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But maybe someday.
Okay.
If I ever retire, Marcia.
Yeah, really. Okay, so now we'll just finish up that. And then now, how did you and Robert meet? I know, but you tell everybody.
You know the whole story. So I was in high school. We went to high school together. I was a sophomore. He was a senior. And he was always looking at me, and we had a class together, and he was always looking at me in class. And so I thought he liked me. Come to find out, he was looking at me because I was always talking with my friends in that class, and he was trying to get his homework done in that class so he didn't have to do the homework at home. So it wasn't because he liked me, it's because he was irritated that
He wanted you to he wanted you to stop talking.
Yes. But so that was what first got him on my radar. And he was a senior. And then I thought, you know what? I think I'd like to go to the senior ball. And I don't know why. My mom and I were out shopping and I found a dress. And I'm like, I'm going to buy this dress and I'm going to wear it to the senior ball. I'm a sophomore. And I was kind of joking, but I kind of thought, well, maybe someone will invite me. Maybe Robert will invite me. So we had a mutual, one of my friends was also friends with him, and she would talk to me about him. And so I, was getting interested. And so then one day in this class where he used to always stare at me, he asked me if I would come outside and talk to him. And I'm like, yes, I'm getting the invitation to the senior ball. So I go out to talk to him, and he says, well, I have this question that I need to ask you. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, all right, cool. And he's like, I asked your sister to the senior ball. And she said,
I know the story, but I'm still laughing. Okay.
I know, it's so crazy. And he says, so she said, I can't because of Kelly. And so now I don't know what to do. And in my mind, I'm like, well, of course you know what to do. Don't take her and take me. But that wasn't exactly what he was asking, right? He wasn't saying, okay, well, she said she can't because of you. So now I'm asking if you want to go. He was more really just asking, like, what do I do about this situation?
Because he wants to take Colleen.
Right.
Yeah, but he was trying to figure out how to, I get it.
It's a good thing.
The real story.
Uh-oh, here he comes. Wait, he's off. You're off mic. You have to come closer if you're going to. If people are going to hear this, you have to come closer.
The real story is I brought her outside the classroom and I asked her, I told her that I asked your sister to the senior ball, but she said, I can't because of Kelly. And so my problem was I didn't really know if Colleen, Kelly's sister, said a definitive no. I didn't know what that meant. So I wasn't sure if she said no, she couldn't, and that was it. So I wanted to get it clarified. And so the rest is history.
That's right. That's pretty much it. The rest is history. I was not too proud to say, well, I'll go with you. And yes, she means no because I want to go to the senior ball with you.
Yeah.
And so we went to the senior ball, and that was it, 1978.
On May 20th.
Mm-hmm. So that's how Robert and I met in high school, way back when.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I have to thank my sister. For not
well, she
hogging
had your
him.
back. Well, and she had your back because she knew you were interested in him.
She must have known. I don't remember having talked to her about it. But yeah, she must have known. Or otherwise, why would she have said that? My mom knew that both of us were talking about him to her. So she knew there was a problem brewing.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway. So Fran, that's the story.
Okay. Well, Kelly, we've been doing this for an hour, and we have a lot more questions, but I think as we said at the beginning of this, we think it's too much. I don't think people want to listen to, 2 hours of this. So
right.
I think we are going to take a little break, and then we'll record and post a separate episode with the rest of the questions or rest of the answers to the questions.
And thanks everyone for the questions. It's been really fun to hear those questions and then think about what is the answer to that? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Marcia.
Okay.
Well, have a good.
All right. Well, we'll
have a good weaving class. You'll have to keep me posted.
I know. I'm very excited. Yeah, very excited about it. So I'll report in on that.
Okay.
All righty. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. To subscribe to the podcast, visit 2usfiberadventures.com.
Join us on our adventures on Ravelry and Instagram. I am Better in Motion, and Kelly is 100 Projects.
Until next time, we're the 2 U's
doing our part for World Fleece.